Fall is all about cozy comforts, and with Hero Bread, you can enjoy all your favorites and still hit your health goals. From breakfast bagels and meal prepped enchiladas to mouth-watering burgers and cheesy noodles. You won't believe Hero Bread's options have 0 to 5 grams net carbs and are high fiber from the taste and texture. And right now, Hero Bread is offering 10% off your order. Go to hero.co and use code FALL25 at checkout. That's FALL25 at hero.co. All figures are per serving of Hero Bread. Contains 2 to 18 grams of fat per serving. See the product nutrition panels on hero.co for more information.
Welcome to episode 208 of Sports Management Podcast. Today's guest is James Kerr. He's a best-selling author of Legacy, the book that revealed the leadership principles behind the legendary All Blacks. We spoke about what truly defines high performance, why humility and accountability matter, how culture can be designed and delivered in any team, transferable skills from sports to business, and much more. James Kerr, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Marcus, thank you. It's great to be here.
It's fantastic to have you on the show. I told you before we hit record here, I read your book, Legacy. Fantastic book, so many learnings, and I want to, talk a little bit about that with you today. But before we get into that, just a little bit brief background about yourself. I know you're New Zealand-born consultant, author, some other things. So if you can give a brief background about yourself.
Sure. I'm a boy from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I had 3 posters on my wall when I was growing up. I had Liverpool Football Club, Kevin Keegan, I was a big fan. The All Blacks, of course, because I'm a New Zealander, the rugby team. And a skier called Frans Klammer, who was the downhill champion of the world at the time. And I think there's something about visualizing your future, even at that point. I've ended up skiing with Frans Klammer, working with the All Blacks and working with Liverpool Football Club. So it's been for me literally a dream career from my sort of childhood bed to the world, if you like. So I guess I see myself as a writer, speaker, coach, and consultant. So I like to dig into the subject of high performance. I really came out of an advertising background. So I like to try to sort of synthesize and simplify down to core principles, which is an education from advertising. To really look at leadership, culture, and mindset. What does it take to create around ourselves and within ourselves an environment in order to perform? And the first team I went inside was the Australian Kangaroos, the rugby team, rugby league team. And I learned a lot and kind of got the bug around elite high performance groups. And so over time, I've worked with more and more, gathered more insights, hopefully shared them through my written work and through my speaking, but also I work at the coalface with leaders, managers, coaches to unlock human potential, I think, and to create an environment in which human beings grow and are able to fulfill their promise and their purpose.
That's fantastic. And, high performance, we will talk about that a lot. And I think there is a lot also in the book that, you can learn a lot from athletes that can be applied also in a business setting.
Absolutely. And, I think my interest is that sweet spot. What are the transferable principles? That I don't believe in analogies very much that, because sport isn't business. It's a different game. Sport, you get tested every Saturday or Sunday or Wednesday night or whatever it is. Business is, it's an infinite game. There are a series of milestones, but underneath it, in terms of human dynamics and the psychology of human performance, I think there are some fundamental principles that are the same. And I'm really interested in how do we transfer from one domain to another, from sport to business to special forces to education to SWAT teams. Because actually each of them have to perform under pressure at one point or another. And how do we create an optimum environment for people to do that?
So if we're talking about high performance, how would you define that term?
I think it's an environment, a high performance environment is an environment that takes you from potential to peak more consistently. Most of us play, here, but maybe we're capable of playing here. And how do you create the conditions around yourself, the environment around yourself and within yourself that enable you to kind of hit your peak more consistently, more often at the right time? You can never be more than you are. We can never be more than the talent we are. But we can usually maximize or optimize is maybe the best way our talent. And so I think high performance, and actually I think success is that. I think that's where you go into a flow state. I think that's where you get real satisfaction. You can look at yourself, the man or the woman in the mirror, and look back at yourself and go, I left it out there. I did everything I could to do it. And that's as relevant for a footballer taking penalties as it is for somebody making a new business pitch. Did you bring your best today? So, in answer to your question, I think high performance is being the best that you can, expressing yourself and becoming what you're capable of becoming. I think the environment is. I think the task is around how do you create an environment that supports that, both in yourself and in those around you.
As you said before, you worked as a consultant and you worked with, military units, you have worked in the business setting, you have worked with sporting teams. So do you feel like high performance, the environment is similar, although it's different industries?
When they work, yes. You clearly see far fewer high performance environments in business. It's more difficult. We're working at scale. There are far fewer specific targets. There are HR lawyers. You can't just get dropped. So in sport, you can, or transferred out or sold. That doesn't happen in business. Business, you tend to have a much broader range of skill sets and levels of excellence. Might have some really excellent people, but you might find that not everybody is bought in the same way. So it's a more difficult environment to create. But so there's a great phrase from Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. If we get a little bit of Russian literature into the conversation, the beginning of Anna Karenina, so I'm going to paraphrase badly, but unhappy families are unhappy for all sorts of reasons, right? But happy families are happy for the same reason. And I'd argue that that's the same for cultures, environments, that there's plenty of ways to go wrong. You can have the wrong people, you can have a lack of clarity, lack of responsibility and accountability, poor communication, shoddy leadership. You can have environments where people are scared to make mistakes or have no real measures, or they're incentivized wrong. Or there's a million ways to screw it up. But there is very few ways, or a limited number of principles that you want to have in play that really make an environment high performance and elite.
And that transitions a little bit to the book Legacy when you were with the All Blacks. So you had 15 main principles that you discuss in that book. So are those the 15 that you think, are the...
Well, I think it narrows down. I think it narrows some of them down. I mean, the first principle is really about humility. Don't get ahead of yourself. Make the team first. Make the group first. Make find a common cause and all move in that same direction, right? There are principles around make sure it's a learning environment, the commitment to get better every day. To strive towards excellence. So you can never really achieve it, but you can always strive towards it, and to create an environment of deep trust and transparency, of human connection, like with each other and with the project, of accountability. What an All Blacks coach says, not hand out, but hand up. An environment in which people have their hand up and they take ownership. So leadership at every level. I talk about values, vision, and purpose. You want to know what you stand for, and you know what you don't. You want a clear sense of vision, and you want a driving purpose, and a bunch of other things. But that's sort of the cluster. And I think probably the most important, it's really about accountability. It's hand up.
I think now you said purpose. Do you think that's something like in sports? If you're playing for the All Blacks, the purpose is pretty clear. It's to win the end goal. If you're in a corporate setting, maybe if you're, in a customer service role or an entry-level position, maybe it's more difficult to find. You don't have the same strong purpose.
I think the trick is finding it, because look, the worst thing in the world for anyone in any job is to lack meaning. Been called bullshit jobs, that lack meaning. So I think on a personal level and on a collective level, the first task is to go, well, how can I create meaning for myself and for others in this thing? So if you're in a customer service situation, it might be, you might have a transactional relationship. Here's somebody else at the counter. Click, click. Thanks very much. See you later. Right. But if you make it even your personal purpose there's a chain of hairdressing salon. They call them day makers. Every conversation, can you make their day? Right. So when they have a haircut, for them, it's a big deal having a haircut. For you do 15 a day. Every customer, can you make their day? And then suddenly there's a focus and a meaning to it. And you go, actually, if they walk out with a big smile on their face, checking themselves out in the mirror, thinking, hell yeah, wow, that's purpose. And that's a sense of, so it doesn't always have to be win the World Cup. Sometimes it can just be, and in fact, it's often winning the World Cup is a byproduct of doing this. Well, always it's a byproduct of loving what you do and being very intentional and deliberate, and sometimes, without sounding too wishy-washy, joyous about your work and what you do, and bringing a bit of love to it and a bit of devotion to it. And that's very purposeful. And I think that does two things. It gives you personal meaning, but it also means everything you do really well. It's a search for excellence in a way. And I think getting that kind of environment rather than a click, click, here's another one. Well, and we've all been in a service industry, we've all dealt with that kind of thing. And you go and shop somewhere else. And it's not a pleasant environment for anyone. But a bit of purpose and a bit of intention changes the game, I think, whatever game you happen to be playing.
So, talking about that culture and setting that, like, who is doing that? Is it, because sometimes in sports you say that it's in the walls. When you come into these teams, you can feel this in the walls. But I mean, it's someone who creates that culture. Is it, is it a CEO? Is it the captain? Is it the president of the club? Or is that something that everyone needs to get around? Or how is that culture created?
In a great culture, it's everybody. You just know it. You walk into it. You want to be part of it. You want to deliver against it. It's a sort of social contagion, I would say. If you don't, maybe at the heart of the question, if you don't have it and you want to have it, how do you get there? Right. And I'd say the sort of, the process I use is define, design, and deliver. First know what that culture should look like. Articulate it. What is your ethos? What do you stand for? What won't you? What are your values? A lot gets talked about values, but what are the actual behaviors against those values? What standards do you have? What does success look like? How have you defined it? So, for instance, day makers, making your day. Right? That's a very clear idea. It has sort of valency in the mind, So everybody, everywhere in that organization knows exactly what's expected of them. So you define, get that clarity. Then how do you design your environment to deliver that? Do you, if you think about a restaurant, the grappa or the spirits that you get at the end that comes free, you've already paid crazy numbers for your meal, but the joy that you get from it, and really, what does that stand for? Hospitality and generosity. Right. So how do you create the small touch point moments and the bigger ones? How do you get the right people? And that begins with recruitment. Do you know the type of people? Because sometimes the right people aren't necessarily the best people, if that makes sense. How do you induct them? How do you review their progress? Do you review their progress against numbers or against values, for instance? How do you reflect, remind, and reinforce within your environment, the writing on the wall, the jerseys you wear, the rituals and the symbols and all of that? And maybe most importantly, what do you reward and recognize within your environment? Because people move towards the things that are rewarded. Now, often we see in business, we see these dysfunctional environments where the reward counters against the idea of teamwork. If you're getting personal bonuses, you want to be the goal scorer, not the assist, right? So you got to align all of those lines, if you like, of effort in the right direction. So that's sort of the beginning of it, and then let's deliver, and that's really about your people at every level. What are the behaviors? Are people accountable? Do they have their hand up? Right. And so in answer to your question, who does it? Well, it starts at the top, it kind of happens at the bottom. And I think the best way to get there is, so there's a change methodology called appreciative inquiry you may have heard of. Appreciative inquiry is, I talk about guided appreciative inquiry. You ask a lot of questions. What do you think? How would we do this? If this is our value, what does this mean for you? You appreciate the answer, but you're guiding it because you know the direction you want to be taking this culture within as a leader. So you co-create and generate that culture through conversation. And I think cultures, there are a lot of ways of defining it, but it's very much about creating a conversation. It's the things we talk about, and the things we talk about is what we pay attention to. And so language and creating that conversation in many different ways, I think, is the leader's responsibility, but it is no less the responsibility of those at lower levels, if you consider it a team of leaders rather than a leader and a follower. If that makes some sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the team building is, you said recruitment, obviously that's like really important. You need to have a great team, and you talk about it in the book, like no dickheads. So, how can you resist tolerating, toxic individuals or someone who brings the morality down? I know Gary Vaynerchuk is talking a lot about that. You need to like hire fast and fire fast.
Yeah, nothing rots, corrodes. The bad apple spoils the barrel. It really does. One person. A lot of tests or experiments done with people, deliberate or provocateurs, put in a group that can change that group for the worse very, very quickly. And the opposite, you have a film like 12 Angry Men. I don't know if you've seen, where one good man or good person, but one good person can change that room. You want to be that good person. And there's a lot that's talked about culture within that idea of environment. But I think it's more subtle than that. I think there's a thing called climate or atmosphere. What's the feeling in the room between? Is it safe? Is it secure? Is it fun? Or is it fearful? Is it anxious? Is it a grind? Now, one of the great things about really high-performing environments is that it's exciting. It's fantastic to be part of it. It's joyous to a degree. Not always easy, challenging and sometimes difficult and sometimes prickly. But, you're signed up and you're on for this. And so I think one of the most interesting questions you can talk to people about and to yourself about is, what am I bringing to the room every time I walk in? What energy do I bring into the room? What behaviors do I need to, that are genuinely making those around me better? And at the same time, that grows me. And I think it's a very good question. If you want to be a leader, and we're all leaders, we're all leading a life. If you want to be a leader and if you want to create an environment in which you perform to your potential, create an environment in which other people perform to their potential as well. And all boats will rise with that tide.
I think that's very interesting and ties back to accountability again, right? You said, like, what do I bring to the table? What do I walk into the room, how can I make this person's day? How can I be better? So it starts with yourself and then that spreads to the team.
Yeah. And there's a great, that sort of social contagion in a good way. Culture's viral, it spreads. And it spreads sometimes just from one individual or one great team within an environment. People say, how do you change the entire culture of an organization? First, begin with yourself, then begin with those around you. And if you set a good enough example, you'll persuade others, or at least others that you do business with. And it becomes a sort of a movement to a degree, a viral movement. Just there's one great quote from sport I think we're throwing in, which is from the San Antonio Spurs, Greg Popovich's basketball team. And they just said, how can I make my teammates better? And it's one of their mantras, how can I make my teammates better? So for instance, in this conversation, if we're both going, I'm probably doing too much talking, but how can I make you better? And if you're thinking, actually, I'll throw him a question, but it'll trip him up, right? Then your pet podcast or the podcast isn't going to be as good. So there's a difference between cooperation and collaboration. Cooperation, we each do our jobs individually, our tasks. Collaboration is where you get that real synergy. And when you get that real synergy, what it does with connection and a sense of clarity and contribution to something bigger than ourselves, what you get is you get cohesion. And cohesion is what wins games. In any sport and in any game, a committed group of people acting with the common interest towards clearly defined goals with energy and talent. That's what you want. It's pretty unstoppable when you get that.
One quote that you had in the book from Sean Fitzpatrick was, judge yourself against the world's best. And I think that's very interesting because in Sweden now, maybe more places, but the kids don't count scores. They don't keep scores in games because, losing winner mentality, stuff like that. But also like a lot of mentality is that you should only compare to yourself, be better than you were yesterday. So I feel that's a little bit outside the box to compare against the best in the world.
I think there are different life stages. I think one thing that Sweden, Norway, I think Norway called it the joy of sport, I think. And they created a program that was really, certainly in the developmental years of athletic development for children, it's got to be about love for the game, because that's where you get commitment, practice, all of that stuff. If it's all about parents on the sideline yelling at you because you didn't score, then that switches people off the game very quickly. It's not an incubator of talent. So I don't have a problem with not keeping the score or not being too competitive at that age, as long as it's fun. And when you're having fun and you're playing a game, you're upskilling. You're starting to learn how to do it, right? But you're in an apprenticeship phase. Then there's the long game, which is just be better tomorrow than you are today. Are you able to, and the All Blacks actually talk about it, get better every day. My commitment is to get better every day.
The atomic habits, like James Clear.
Atomic habits, it's marginal gains. Bill Walsh from the San Francisco 49ers said, it's about cumulative character. Small incremental improvements compound, right? And lead to, slow start and you get that. So I think that's really fundamental because you can't govern the result, right? You can only govern your own actions, almost the Stoics. You take care of, control the controllables, right? But then what you want to do, you don't want to start getting, we won the local divisional championship. That's great. I'm the best. Compare yourself with the best. And I think that's where it comes in. You want to benchmark your expectations high, but you don't want to be living in comparison while you're doing it. So there's almost a mental trick, I think, that you go, and, it's the same as getting, I'm a writer and I think I talk about in the book, I can't remember his name, but from PBS, talks about people who are likely to be good as a writer know when they're not being a very good writer. And you've got to go through about 10 or 15 years of that, knowing that you suck, right? Compared with the greats, right? Knowing, you write it, you think you're Shakespeare, you read it, you're not. So you have to have the humility to not be as good as you think you can be and just get better every day and make the process, the craft, the thing. And then one day you might be Shakespeare, maybe not, or you'll be you, actually. You'll be you and you'll have that greatness and that form of expression. So, but you want to benchmark, you want to be aiming, there's a fantastic Maori proverb, aim for the highest cloud, because even if you come short, you'll hit a lofty mountain. So go hard or go home. You want to aim for greatness. Absolutely. But greatness is not attained just by aiming at it and imagining it. It's aimed by getting better it's achieved by getting better every day. So compartmentalize that, a toggle switch between the present and a possible future, the present. But performance happens in the moment, every moment, day by day by day by day. That's where it really happens.
No, that's fascinating to me. And as you said, like to compartmentalize that, to look at yourself, how can I be better every day? And then when you reach that goal, you win that game, then you compare yourself to the best. So you don't, stay humble, and so you have something else to work against. But as you say, you need to make that mental switch.
Mental switch, you got to aim big. You got to have a vision. I'd write about it in Legacy, Richie McCaw. He announced he wanted to be an All Black. And his uncle, I think, challenged him, said, surely you want more than that. Surely you want to be a great All Black. And of course, Richie did want to be a great All Black. That's the ultimate in New Zealand as a rugby player, certainly. So he wrote GAB. He keeps notebooks, wrote GAB, and asked himself, what would a great All Black do every day? So the question he asked himself, we talked about purpose, that focus, to be a great All Black, what would a great All Black do? Well, it's raining and I don't want to train, but a great All Black would train. I don't want to do that extra work. I don't want to get up early, but a great All Black would get up early. So every day you can keep working and that cumulative gains that you get, but you're doing it for a bigger reason always. So again, toggling between what do I do every day and where am I going, I think is a really important skill to develop. Otherwise, you either get lost in daydreams that you can never fulfill, or you get lost in the detail, and you need to have a compass for where you're going and a reason. And within that reason, there's the resilience to keep doing the hard stuff day by day. We see successful people, successful sports people, and think that who make it look easy, but they've worked hard. People talk about soccer players like they're arrogant often because they get paid so much. Not really. Some are a little bit cocky, but they know what hard work looks like. They've applied themselves forever and done the hard work. That takes a real sense of character, I think.
And it's this saying that an overnight success takes 10 years.
10 years and the rest. I mean, that's a cliche, but bro, there's no substitute for hard work. In any sport, in any environment, it might come down to a few critical moments. But most of the time, so if you've got a rugby player or a footballer, most of their life, they're not playing rugby. They're doing something else. But it's what you're doing when you're doing something else that matters. The level of commitment, the alignment. If you go, listen, I'm only really a footballer or a hockey player or whatever when I'm out on the ice. Well, you're a hockey player on a Thursday night when you decide to stay up late and gaming, drinking beer. You're still a hockey player. There are decisions that you're making that will impact performance. So if you're really clear on what it is and you design your world around it, you create joy around that world. You need to sacrifice. You need to say no to a lot of stuff, but also say yes to a lot of stuff you love.
That's a perfect transition into my next one of the, I don't know if it's a direct quote, I think so, from the book. Saying yes to high performance means first saying no. So that's a little bit to what you're talking to now, right?
Yeah, I think it's right. Steve Jobs, who we talk about business, Johnny Ive, who was the chief designer there, talks about what focus was for Jobs and within Apple. And it was an unrelenting, single-minded focus on the next problem and saying no to a million opportunities that could be great. It could be fantastic. There's a million things that are brilliant to do, and all of them are possible, right? But the old cliche, you can be anything you want. You can't be everything you want. So what's that choice? What are you going to choose? Because where you put your attention is what happens in your life, because with attention comes energy and the ability to to apply consistent attention to the stuff that really matters to you is where you get really good at it. The world falls apart, but you're still there. All of those benefits come from it. So you look at Apple, they could have done a million things, but they focused on the things that seemed to really, really matter. Not all of them worked, but many of them did. And you go, right. So sacrifice and that level is, I think, a big part of it. You can't. You're unlikely to be a great hockey player, say, and a great electric guitarist, and a great writer. It's very hard to be each of those things. You're going to make a choice. At some point, you're going to make a choice. Probably not with your kids when they're 9 or 12. You want them to develop multiple skills, become a Swiss Army knife. And there's a lot of research in athletics that says, again, the Norwegian model, and I imagine it's similar in Sweden, is that actually, rather than developing skills in a particular sport, what you're doing is developing athleticism. And athleticism is transferable. And I think it's the same as anything. When you're young, you want to try things out. It's important. But at a certain point, you've got to pick your horse. And then you get really focused and you start being able to say no. And listen, I'm not saying you need to live a monk's life either. Life is for living and enjoying and experiencing. And that's an important part of having a balanced approach. And I think that's the other. So I realize I've just spoken for about 10 minutes in one burst, but there's an interesting way to look at it. And it's called the four-legged chair or four-legged stool. Really comes out of different theories of humanistic psychology, that a lot of us put our weight on one leg of a chair. Let's call that performance. But as soon as that leg gets kicked out from under you, you fall over. So what are the other legs you need? You need physical. You want to stay in reasonably good neck. You don't thrive with a hangover, particularly. Right? Maybe when you're 20, but certainly not when you're 40. You need a social connection. Your intimate relationships, your family, your friends, your colleagues, the people you buy coffee from. They're really important. And you have what I call God or a dog. Music, art, worship, something that takes you beyond yourself. And if you really want to set yourself up, for high performance in whatever realm, you need those four legs on the stool. You want a balanced life. And that's the long game. It may, when you're 20 or 25, you may think, well, I'm going to work 23 hours a day and I'm going to outwork everyone. And that might work for a while. But chances are you'll burn out. Chances are, you don't have a life. And there's a lovely phrase from John Bowlby, a psychologist, and I'm paraphrasing again, but he says something like, what we need is a stable base from which to boldly venture. So I think from a personal point of view, creating a stable base, a seat to sit on, if you like, or to stand on maybe, that satisfies in at least those four different regions in one way or the other. So you're physically expressed, socially expressed, spiritually expressed, and creatively expressed, let's say, for professional. Then what you've done is you build yourself a really strong platform to keep on performing. And then you get like the power of habit, the marginal gains, the accumulated marginal gains can take place. Because the worst thing that can happen, you do really well for a spurt, and then your marriage breaks up, or your relationship breaks up, or your body breaks down, or you have a spiritual crisis, one form or another, and you burn out. That's not a winning proposition, So how do you if we talk about how do we set our environment up, what is the environment that we exist in? What does our life look like? I think it becomes a really important set of questions.
Yeah, definitely. And that comes to high performance as well, right? That all these four factors will not be perfect always. So how can you perform your best when, you might struggle in some of these four legs?
Life is never perfect, right? Actually, if you look at the Stoics again, the aim is to achieve kind of equanimity, happiness, I guess, joy, whatever's going on. I lost my leg in an accident. Oh, well, how can you stay happy? Or how can you stay present? Or how can you stay living? We're 3 goals down in the first half. That's not the plan. How do I come back to base so I can be my best? they're very different examples, but it's kind of the same. How can you come back to an optimum environment inside? And that partly that's around in sport anyway. That's about, self-regulation, maintaining your state. How do you stay in an optimum place? And I think as you get older, and I think as mindset is a skill set. It's something you can learn. It's something that we develop. Our ability to regulate our emotions, to clarify our thinking, to resist impulse, to hear your fear but do it anyway, to process disappointment and get back on your feet very quickly. Those are all skills that we can learn and must learn and must keep learning. It doesn't ever stop. Because I think I said it before, success in any realm happens in the moment, every moment. Do we react or do we respond? We want to respond in a way that is aligned with that bigger purpose, that helps us get better every day, that makes our teammates better, that creates a good climate around us. We're always in reaction. Oh no, score's been gold. It's hopeless now, right? You don't win anything, so I think it's in there. And, I think that probably comes down to the delivery side of, define, design, and then deliver. Who are we being in order to become what we're capable of becoming?
I think like one of the best to that is Djokovic. Like he spoke about that because in tennis, you might win 80% of the games, but you won only like 55% of every point. And he said that like he doesn't like when people say that you should like suppress bad emotions or thoughts, but like you get them and then you move on. So I'd like to have that mindset. I think he's one of the best at that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he's absolutely the best at that, or one of the best at that. And I think that's exactly it. To change a state, you need to process. Process and change are the same thing. You get a bunch of meat at one end and you put them through a process and you get sausages. It's the process that gives you the sausages, right? And if you go, I can't deal with the feelings, you never process them. They're going to leak out somewhere else. So it's not about being on an automaton. It is about being able to go in tennis, shit, I lost that point. It was match point. I could have been the Wimbledon champion now. And seeing those thoughts as imposters, letting them go, in Zen and in meditation, it's like letting them blow away in the wind and then go, right, boom, next. What's next? So one of the frameworks I use is win. What is not? What can't I control? I can't control that I lost match point. Right? What is now? Well, I'm standing here. I've got one more go at, I've got another go at match point. Right? I've got a point up my sleeve. Right? What is needed? What's my plan? Okay, his backhand is weak. I'm gonna swing it that way. I'm gonna serve for that. Right. What is next? Get into my serving routine. So you go from all of that world of complexity into the simple next action where you focus your attention. Much easier said than done. But it is the decisive difference. Djokovic, I think it's the decisive difference for him. And that's really, mindset is a skill set. It's a practice. It's a practice you can practice.
I like that. Mindset is a skill set, and obviously that means that you need to practice it. I mean, you have been around high performers for a long time. So what are some like non-negotiable behaviors or standards that you've seen that are, must be in order to have a high performing team?
I think a high degree of accountability is probably, it's on me. No one else to blame. No excuses. No bullshit. Got this one. That's, I think, has got to be number one, because as soon as you're making excuses, you've weakened yourself and your relationships around you. So a degree of emotional honesty and courage, I think, is really important. Non-negotiables often, I think there's an interesting thing around non-negotiables is that all cultures are sort of the same but different. The actual content of what those non-negotiables can be very different in different environments. but what is consistent is that they exist. So if you look at classic team formation, form, storm, norm to perform, right? Form, you come together as a team, you don't really know each other, you have no sort of, there are a lot of assumptions. Then those assumptions are put to the test. You storm, you have arguments. But you said, oh, da, da, da. And then the aim really is to norm. And that's setting non-negotiables. That's setting standards, right? And it's like, if it's about time, some players are coming in late and some are 15 minutes early. Who's right? Well, none of them, because they're all assumptions. There's no agreement. But if you do a Lombardi time, and you say, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late, are we all in on that? And everyone signs up to that. Then you've got agreement. That's a non-negotiable. That's an agreement. So I think non-negotiables have to be agreements between people that they willingly brought themselves into, rather than assumptions that somebody thinks this is what you should be doing. And so shifting from assumption to agreement is really what non-negotiables are about. And then the content of them will be very different depending on the context. Sometimes it's about time. Sometimes it's about accountability. I think is probably number one in just about any environment. Hand up. It's on me. I got this. You can count on me. Rely on me. If I can rely on myself, you can rely on me. And if you can rely on me, I know I can count on myself. It's hugely powerful in an environment and in an individual. It's the slippage that happens when that doesn't happen. So if there was number one, it would be that. But I think it doesn't really matter what they are. I mean, it does to a degree. That's up to you to create. But it needs to be an agreement, not an assumption.
The book you wrote over 10 years ago now, do you feel like it's still the same, like these principles hold, or has there been any evolution in, how we see high performance versus when you wrote it?
It seems to have passed the test of time. I'm probably not the right person to answer that. It seems to have passed the test of time reasonably. I think what has happened over that last 10 years, a little bit to do with legacy but really to do with kind of time moving on, is there is a lot more understanding of the mental side of sport. There's more acceptance of it. Gilbert Anoka, the mental skills coach, who brilliant guy. His book is about to come out. I'm going to give him a plug for his book. It's about to come out. Look for it. His name's Gilbert Anoka. Gilbert had to pretend he was a masseuse in the early days of New Zealand rugby when he was coming as a mental skills guy. He was down on the team sheet as a masseuse because the stigma of being somebody who works with a mental game was too much. So I think what has happened over that time, I think the principles are still the same. I think many of them are more widely accepted and more widely practiced now. But no, I think all of them, I think that's the beauty of principles. They tend to be reasonably timeless. And I tried to find what are the timeless things. The idea of humility is probably the oldest idea from the ancients. Achilles' heel. If you think you're immortal, you're not. That's an old idea. A lot of these, the power of purpose is not, it didn't start, yesterday. These are hopefully ancient ideas that have, I think one of the things with the All Blacks, particularly as a case study, was there is a lot of the impact of Maori culture that has sort of drifted through osmosis up into it. And so there's some quite ancient, I wouldn't call them tribal beliefs, but quite ancient beliefs that are unbelievably powerful and true and will forever be true in the way human beings coexist. So no, I don't think it's out of date. And I think because they're principles, I think that gives them a certain timeless quality.
No, I would agree with you as well. And really interesting what you said with the mentality and, mental coaches, because I've spoken to former athletes on this podcast and that, been that they were practicing 20, 15 years ago. And then, as you said, there was a different stigma. You didn't have that type of mental coaches as you have today. So I would agree that I think that's been a big change for sure.
And a big change, once upon a time, the idea of self-development, not that long ago, was slightly embarrassing for many people. That idea that, it's sort of 70s self-help, the age of Aquarius, it was all a little bit hippie. Very not that now. Well-being is about as mainstream as you can be, and good. That idea that actually we can and should work on ourselves, again, as an ancient idea, that's really what the Greeks were doing and the Romans were doing. That's the beginning of philosophy, how to live, and so really, I think a lot of this is how to live, how to live the fullest, best life, how to be a full expression of myself, how to take myself from my potential to my peak. That's a really fundamental. And if you look at humanistic psychology, that the urge to self-actualize comes out of Maslow and others. The tip of that pyramid, if you like, is to self-actualize, is to become. I think it's a phrase I used. I think it actually came from Robert Louis Stevenson. To become what we're capable of becoming is so intrinsic in us as human beings that somehow to limit that by what other people will think, or they'll think I'm silly, or they think I'm trying too hard, or they think I'm a narcissist, or whatever the narrative you've got around something that's about, in Roman times, it was about in search of virtue, which was the ethos. The Roman ethos was how can I become a good human being? It was sexist in those days. It was a good man. But how can I become a good human being, a better human being every day? And, the All Blacks say better people make better All Blacks. They focused on the character. Michael Jordan, I think, said, he might have been paraphrasing John Wooden, said something like, talent will win you a game, but character wins tournaments. So if we develop ourselves as leaders, as human beings, as men, as women, we make the most of our talent in that way. And if we make the most of our talent, we sort of make the most of ourselves. And, we can look at ourselves in the mirror at the end of the day or at the end of our life and going, all right, I've done what I could, and I'm happy with that. I'm satisfied with that. And I've expressed myself. And that's a tremendously powerful force to harness, I think. John Wooden was asked, John Wooden, by the way, basketball coach, for those who don't know, well worth reading about, incredibly successful on the college level. I think he won 10 in a row or 10 college basketball in the US with the Bruins. A very values-based teacher, really, and coach. And he created his own pyramid of meaning. But he was once asked if he walked through the pearly gates, what would he want God to say? And he said, well done. That's all he wants to hear. Well done. And I think there's something in the child in us all that wants to know that we did well. We did the best that we could with what we've got. And it's a flow state. It's a satisfying state. It's a state of contribution to something bigger than ourselves. And, to come back to your first question, what is high performance? That, I think.
I love how you tie that all together, going back to high performance. I usually ask, because there are some young people listening that, might be early in their career. So, some advice that you might have for someone who wants to be better and achieve high performance.
Yeah. Look, I think if you're in your teenage years and coming into your 20s, there are different life stages we go through about kind of who we're trying to impress to a degree. Where does our self-talk come from? And we move away to a degree from our parents, and we move into our peer group, and we want our friends and the possible romantic relationships have become hugely important to us. So if we're talking about being at that age, I think that all of that is really important, connecting and so on. But we can't buy into the groupthink of everyone around us. We also have to go, who am I? Not who am I in comparison with, but who am I? What's important to me? What are my values? What do I value the most? What's my vision for myself in the future? And it may have nothing at all to do with the vision of the people around you. You know, if you're at university, the vision of the people around you might be to go out and get drunk. And that might be fine if that's your ambition, right? But there is no right answer to this. But is it yours? Or are you kind of being pulled up in that? So I think there's a coach, a football manager I've worked with, and he says, think in ink. Write it down. Get really clear. Clarity. There's another, can't remember who said this, but another great phrase, which is clarity is intensity. If you can get really clear about where you're going, what's important to you, where you're going to put your attention, where you're going to put your energy, you can get really clear about that, then the intensity, the energy compounds. So it's the oldest, again, tying it back to the ancients, it's the oldest lesson from the ancient, which is know thyself. You know, I think the line, I think it's a biblical, you know, know thyself and thou shalt see God. I'm not particularly religious, but God in that sense is good. It's the best for yourself, you know. So, but you've got to begin with your self-knowledge, because you can't live anyone else's life. We get to live our own. So my advice, very long-winded, it wasn't a short answer at the end of a thing, is do the work. Find a quiet space. Be prepared to say no to the boozy Friday night or whatever it is. Be prepared to be a little bit different sometimes. And it's not easy. You'll be pulled back into one, but to be outstanding, sometimes you have to stand out.
By definition.
By definition. To be extraordinary, you have to do extra to what's ordinary. By definition. Right? Are you doing that? You know, I was talking to my son plays guitar, very good guitar, and he's very, very good at it. Is he prepared to do that extra? And he doesn't have to. I'm not pushing him, but I'm putting it in front of him and saying, listen, you know, maybe if you wanted, you could get up at 6 o'clock in the morning with headphones, because I won't be awake necessarily for a little bit, and headphones, and you get 2 hours of practice that no one else is doing in your peer group. That's the extra beyond the ordinary. So do you know yourself enough to what you want, and are you prepared to do what it takes to make that happen? Whatever anyone else says. That would be mine.
I love that. I like to end on a networking question. So who from your network do you think would be a good guest on this podcast?
Oh, loaded question. You know, Gilbert Anoka would be worth an invitation. An extraordinary man with a book out. Look, I'm going to avoid the question slightly rather than name too many names, and just say, listen, I think everybody in this world has a great story to tell. I think you can learn, and you should be aiming to learn from everybody. There's no sage on the stage. There's only the guide at your side. You just want to get good guides along the way, but it's up to you to take the lessons, not up to them to give you the lessons. So I've completely avoided your question and that networking opportunity. But you know, everybody has an amazing story, I think, and it's up to us to find out what that story is.
Completely agree. I mean, this podcast has 200 plus, speakers, and all of them have shared an amazing story. And I did get Gilbert out of you, though, so I got one name, so I'll take it.
You got one. Yeah, he'll kill me for that, but no, possibly not. But and you know, I do recommend. I haven't read it yet, but I'm absolutely certain it will be extraordinary. I think it's coming out in the next couple of weeks, and I hope it will be an extension of many of the ideas that I discussed in Legacy. And he's an incredibly talented and lovely man, and was instrumental in taking the All Blacks to it's the most successful period of the most successful team of all time. So there's a lot to learn from that particular individual, I think.
For sure. James, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And I told you, I can't praise your book enough. I read it during the summer. I'm the furthest away from a bookworm, and I just went through this, in a couple of days almost. So great read. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast.
Marcus, listen, a genuine a pleasure, a privilege to share something with you. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com, connect with me on LinkedIn, or follow the podcast on Instagram, X, and Facebook @SportsM Podcast.